Yo, we're live. Social Club's in the house. Sorcery Social Club. What's up, guys? We're waiting on Edwin here. I figure I'll just jump in and stall so we don't lose people. You know, I always start on time, precisely right on time, give or take 10 minutes. So it's 6:30 on the dot. I got the paintings lined up, ready to go. We're short one Edwin. So I think he's on my same time zone. So we'll wait for him to jump in. And what we're doing here today is we're going to talk to Edwin Tracy, who many of you guys may know from the Magic the Gathering scene. He's an old school Magic player that's been playing Magic for decades, I think since the beginning. I don't know. I'll have to ask him. We haven't talked before. This will be kind of like a first introduction. And I noticed him in the Sorcery Contested Realm community Facebook group recently commenting on some of the things going on, talking about how he's been playing with friends. Filthy casual. Hey, hey, hey. And I invited him onto the show to talk about his experience with sorcery, what got him into it, and what's resonating, what he thinks about the outlook for sorcery, how it compares maybe a little bit gameplay-wise to Magic. It's a very different project, you know, but very different game, very different gameplay style. But him being such an avid Magic guy and collector, I thought it'd be cool to chat. So, Edwin, how you doing, man? You hear me all right?
Hey,
Thanks for popping in. I was just
adjust the audio here.
yeah.
Yeah,
I was
hear
just
you, but I got you coming through two speakers.
oh, okay. You think it's on my end? Try to do you don't have any AirPods on, so you got to come in through your you got to
I
choose
need
the
to mute. There's two feeds, probably like the video.
yeah, it could be I could play with some of the settings on
Oh,
my
here we
side.
go. I just closed the
Oh,
window.
okay.
Yeah, there. I had the YouTube window open and I had the this video going.
Okay. No problem. So I'm coming through loud and clear.
Yep, there we go. Now it's all
All
good.
right. Awesome. Thanks, man. Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on. I figured we'll start off doing we haven't talked before. I just kind of noticed you on the community group. I'm familiar with your channel. I was into Magic early on. I wanted to let you kind of introduce yourself because you're some of my audience may not know who you are. I'm sure a lot do, and likewise, probably people are coming on for you and probably have never heard of me. So, why don't you introduce yourself and your background in TCGs a little bit?
So I'm known on the internet as Edwin the Magic Engineer, and I guess I've played Magic all the ways from 1996, from like right around like Ice Age Alliances kind of time frame, all the way up until today. Although I don't really buy like a lot of newer cards, but like I was heavy buying and like playing actively, very actively playing for an awful long time in Vintage and Legacy. You know, way back then we used to call it like Type 1 and Type 1, 5, and 2 and everything. So I've been there through the transitions like over the years, and I've bought and sold Power 9 many times in my life. Like the current set that I own now is like my fourth set. The other like ones that I had beforehand, like I like bought them and then I had to like sell them back off or trade them to upgrade them over the years. So somewhere around like 2016, I actually was wanting to get back into Magic, and I still had a bunch of the smaller cards, but I didn't have like a lot of the big stuff because I'd like sold off my cards. So I saw this auction on Dave Adams' Card World, and I bought this set of beta that was like one of every like rare, and then one of every common, one of every uncommon. Like the whole thing was like signed. And this is like 2016 before the massive run up. So there was only a few cards that were missing from it. And my wife, for some crazy reason, gave me the green light to do it. So I bought that, but then I needed to like finish getting the other Power 9 cards that I was trying to like replace again. And so I contacted actually Vintage Magic, and I was just trying to work out a deal so I could give them, because I had like all these like beautiful signed beta cards, and I was like, hey, can I swap you even for like unlimited for the cards I'm missing? And so we chatted a bunch, and then he was like, hey, you seem to know a lot about this game, you should make a YouTube channel. And so he pushed me into it, and so I started making videos, and he kind of like helped promote me to kind of get me started a little bit. And then he introduced me to a bunch of other people like Open Boosters and Rudy and stuff. But like, I mean, the content, like I was very familiar with because I knew the game. I knew the cards like very well. So I knew what I was talking about. And I'd also studied like finance for like an awful long time because like I am an actual, it's not just the BS thing. I actually am an electrical and software engineer. I have 2 degrees and I've had years in industry. And so being an engineer for a while, you eventually get investment money. And so I had to like learn how to handle my investment money. And very quickly I realized that like, you know, a lot of the things you hear out there is just garbage. So I dug into that. So by the time like I had this 2016 like introduction to people that are like, hey, go to YouTube, it's like I'd already done my research. Like I knew what I was talking about. And so when I started my channel, there was a lot that I could say. And then I was being introduced to people like Open Boosters and Rudy and Tavis King and Andy Schrock and like all these people. And I guess there was just, sometimes it's like a right place, right time kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I was starting to make these videos talking about finance and talking about these old Magic cards. And I saw where it was going. And there was a whole shift that was happening, like a demographic kind of shift in like finance world, where like, it's not all due to like Bitcoin, but there was like, that was a big part of it, where Bitcoin started like taking off and people were trying to figure out what to do with their money. And so when all this money is eventually starting to come into Magic, also because the old school format was beginning and it was starting to really gain a lot of people. And for many years, these cards sat on the side as just like, you know, hey, we don't get to use these anymore, but we still love having them. Well, now there was like a format to like use them again. So people start going on the internet trying to figure out like, okay, well, what can I do and what's out there? And then so there wasn't a lot of content out there. So I was like one of the few people that were there. So it was kind of like right place, right time. Like my channel started getting promoted. And so then I got to meet all these other YouTubers, and then we started like sharing on each other's platforms and such. And like it ended up being kind of like good, kind of bad, because that first person I connected with, Daniel Chang, ended up being like someone like I'm completely disconnected from him now. And like it was like a thank you for helping me get started, but at the same time it was like I cannot like stand by some of the business practices and stuff that you got. But you know, at the same time, like I got to meet all these other people. And so like so now like at some point like I've got a YouTube channel, I've got a subscriber base, and now I'm appearing on like Alpha Investments and Open Boosters and Power 9 Quest, and like I even got to know like LSS, you know, the creators of Flesh and Blood and like some of their main designers, and I got to go to events and like hang out with those guys. And so I got to start kind of like be in this like spot where I got to like get to know all these people. And what's funny about it is like I was like, you know how like in some things you have like, you know, the professor, like everybody knows, you know, Tulare Community College, right? Everybody knows the professor. Well, to some extent, at least in old school circles, I guess I'm now known as the engineer. And all I was trying to like really bring to it is like, I am a tech guy. Like I'm going to be super analytical about everything that I do. That's all I was really trying to bring into it. But that kind of became like my thing, or I guess my brand or something like that. And so that's how the whole thing kind of got started. And in terms of like sorcery, because like hopefully a bunch of you are here to talk about sorcery, the involvement that I had is not actually a ton at the beginning. I did actually meet Eric Olson in the 2018 old school championships that were in Las Vegas. We had this big tournament that was like 150 people that were there. And like back in those days, that was a pretty good turnout for old school. And I brought this deck. I didn't want to play the deck because I always felt like I'm kind of copying out. And I wanted to play something other than that. So I played like this really aggressive version of a red, green, blue deck I was calling Rug Crazies, because the year before I had Berserks in it. So that was the crazies part. So I'm playing that deck, and you know, like you can do okay or you can do badly. And I was just mostly there to have fun, but I ended up like doing pretty good. And I actually made top 8. Well, Eric Olafson also made top 8 at that same event. But he actually got beat out by a guy named Jason Murray. So I didn't actually get to play against him, but I actually got all the way up to the finals, and I got to play against Jason Murray in the finals. And like I beat him one game, he beat me the other game, and then game 3, he had a Library of Alexandria out for like literally like 30 cards worth of his deck. You know, his first 7 plus another 23. Like I didn't find a strip mine until like my deck was like halfway through, or like you know, he was drawing faster than I was. So I don't know, 20 some cards down in my deck or something like that. Finally removed the library, but at that point he'd already established his base, and so he ended up winning that old school championship. And congrats to him. He was a really good player. Old school friend too. But anyways, like so, like I got like a tiny bit of a chance to meet Eric there, but I also
Mm-hmm.
got a really good chance to meet one of Eric's friends, Chris Wilson. One of the CEO of Grinding Gear Games, who like Eric works with.
Right.
And so, like to this day, like I actually do maintain contact with Chris Wilson. Like when he comes to Orlando, like next time, like he might like reach out to me, and we're planning on like meeting up and stuff. And he's huge into old school Magic as well.
Yep.
But anyways, so I heard about Sorcery, of course, for years because Rudy is literally like one of my best friends, and we literally like chat back and forth on the phone like almost every day or every other day, like constantly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so like he, Rudy, of course, was hearing about Sorcery constantly. He's talking about it, but especially after the whole Flesh and Blood thing, I was a little standoffish, and so I didn't want to jump into like the alpha. Like you get right in the beginning. Because it seemed like it was pretty good, and I knew Eric like knew a lot about games. He's clearly involved in games. I knew he knew a lot about old school Magic, but honestly, I was just I'd been burned, by like jumping into some other stuff.
Yep.
And so I was a little standoffish. And then once I finally had a chance to see some of the rules of the game and everything, then I was interested. And I was like, okay, well now I'd actually like to buy it. But then at that point, like Alpha had like already taken off, and it was like really high price. And like I was like, okay, I'll jump in for Kickstarter prices, but now I'm like, the prices are pretty high. Now the risk is higher, your initial cost is higher. I wasn't sure. So then when beta finally came out, like I was on top of it. I was like, I'm going to get some beta, right? And it was actually funny because I chat with Rudy sometimes, and like before he does like one of his big sales, and he did this big like sale of like all these like beta versions of like a kit that he had done. And he literally told us like, hey, you guys, like, don't buy this, I'll set like at least a couple aside because I know you guys are going to buy them. And we're like, yes, we are going to buy them, like set one aside. Yep. And then like he sold so many that he was just like, yeah, sorry guys. Yeah.
You missed it. Yeah.
We were like, what the hell, man? We were like,
it sold fast. They always do.
So
yeah.
We had to like dig into the secondary market and buy them. But I wasn't going to miss it at this point because I was like, I really want to get in this game now. And so Open Boosters went out and bought like a bunch of like cases of beta, and then he was able to like sell me some of his cases. So I finally got my hands on some cases and started cracking them open and like building decks and stuff like that. And so like now I've got it's not a complete set of beta, but it's like it's not terribly far away. I mean, I could like not spend a ton of money and like try to finish out that set.
Yeah.
But that's always been my thing, personally, like to build like play sets of cards because I'm not a storefront, right? Like I don't buy and sell the cards and try to make a profit. Like my day job is being an engineer. Like I write software, I design things. That's what I do, right?
Yep.
But like I definitely get involved in these things in terms of a play aspect. So I wanted to get back together like a huge play collection and then maybe have a tiny bit. So I've only bought like one case of like beta extra, and then I have like one sealed box of alpha, and like that's it. And that's probably enough for me. And I'll just try to like flesh out the rest of singles. And so now I'm starting to like look at the same thing you guys are, like which singles do I want to grab? So I've been starting to grab, the dual lands. I started buying those at like $20 each or something like that for the foil dual lands. And they're now up to like 30 some bucks each. And then of course like Step and some others are like now like somewhere around 100. That's a whole discussion I'd love to have with you about that too. Like what's going on with that? And then other cards that I think like I look at it and I think like this card might be a really important playable card, like Dispel, which is I think it's an Earth card. And it's like a disenchant effectively.
Yep.
But like I've been buying like foil Dispels because I'm like, this removes 2 permanent types very easily. It's easily splashable. I'm kind of thinking this is going to be an important card. And out of the 6 boxes that I opened, like I got 1 foil Dispel, so they're decently rare. So I'm looking at it and thinking like $3 is way too cheap for these. So anyways, that's kind of where I'm at now. Like I'm just like learning the game. I'm probably messing certain rules of it up. But I love the way that it has like, the grid that you have to lay out. And you have to kind of take over little areas, and you have to like, keep like moving your guys around and then firing off projectiles in a certain direction and such. So I don't know. And that's probably a good base on like who I am and like where I come from.
Yeah, I never heard the story before. That's interesting because I played Magic as a kid too. That's like really the only TCG I was really into. But I grew up in Rochester, New York, and then I moved to Philadelphia area. My dad worked for Kodak headquarters in Rochester, so we relocated to Philly. and I like lost all my childhood friends, and I never played Magic again my whole life, you know?
Oh.
But I was like, I know it's kind of a sad story, but I was
Uh-huh.
like super into it as a kid. I mean, I was born in '81, so I was like pretty young when I was, you know, middle school age when Magic came out.
Yeah.
So I had like a friend with an older brother that was in very early, so he had like pages and pages of the Power Nine, and that kind of like mind f me for life, you know. I was like, I always wanted to be like this guy and have like an awesome collection like him.
What year was that
Um,
that he had pages?
oh man, it was probably. I mean, I think I moved in 1995, 1996. So he was playing very early. He was going to like the conventions and tournaments, and he was like winning those and winning booster boxes of like the very early stuff.
So
So he
that's
just
like when
had,
boxes were like 100 to 150 each. Lotus was like 200, something like that.
yeah. I mean, everything was probably like $100 or less. Most everything. You know, he had a lot
Yeah.
of the Moxes, all the Power Nine, and it was just like, you know, I'd play against him, and like my friend was more on my level because we had no money. But this guy had a lawn business in a neighborhood, so he was just buying by the box, whereas we were going into the LGS and buying like a couple packs at a time of revised, mostly.
Yeah.
So basically, I got away from it for like 20 years or so, and then I got back in around 2018 to 2020. But the interesting thing is, when I came back, I wasn't really that interested in Magic. For whatever reason. I mean, I was nostalgic from the early days with the artists, the artwork, the old cards. But I didn't start buying modern, and like the vintage stuff was just too expensive to get back into. So I started getting more into the new games. Like Flesh and Blood was kind of intriguing for a little while, but then when Sorcery came out with some of the Magic artists and some of the artwork really resonated with me on a strong level because I'm into art. I started getting some of the original paintings and
Yeah,
things.
it's really a throwback to Magic in a big way.
Yeah.
Like everything that's in Sorcery.
That's what I was going to ask you. I thought it was interesting that you say that the grid style gameplay appealed to you as a big Magic fan. Because at first I was like, I almost like writ the game off because like I was really into the art, so I hung with it on that level at first. But I was like, I don't know, are people going to really gravitate to a grid style format? Is that really going to appeal to the masses, or will it be more of a board game market and not TCGs?
Well,
So how do you feel about that?
Well, I am a gamer, you know, so like I
Mhm.
mean I couldn't count the number of times I've played Settlers of Catan or like some other like game
Okay.
style, like the board, like you know, board domination and like a Risk or like a Settlers or something is like it's a thing. You know,
Yeah.
you have your strategy, but then you also kind of see like your development kind of like going out.
Hmm.
And I like the aspect of Magic that you don't have to have a certain kind of grid or play mat. That's not all bad. You know, it is kind of nice that you can just sit down with a deck and then you can play a game. So that has its own niceness. But
Sure.
at the same time, there's something to be said for like, okay, well, what if I have like a grid? And I want to see like, you know, my like army kind of like amass out. And a
Yeah.
lot of these card games have like never, none of them that I've played have ever really like built that out.
Hmm.
And there was times where in like Magic where like you like everybody would spread out all their cards for a Chaos Orb,
Yeah.
or like you keep all of them in like in one pile, and then some people started getting weird about it, like okay, well you have to keep your lands have to be back, and spells and creatures have to be up on the front, and some people would get really like restrictive about it. But it was kind of, everyone kind of had their own style.
Yeah.
But I really like that the dimension that can add, and the dimension of like thinking about like okay, if I have like my sorcerer, my caster is here, and I'm going to shoot a projectile. Is there going to be something in the way? Like, because there's some of them that like say like, okay, it's going to, whatever hits first is going to be the thing that it hits. And they shoot one at a time. Like there's cards in Sorcery that make those kind of distinctions. And that's just cool, you know? So now you're kind of thinking like along that kind of like grid pattern as well. And I really don't think that that's been explored a lot in a universe that is kind of built upon a lot of the framework of what Magic can be, right? So I'm excited actually to see where that goes.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. Like when I actually tried playing that, like I played the game and I was really impressed with the different dimensions of flying things versus earth versus submerged, like all these different three-dimensional aspects. It's very analytical. Like when I was in college, I would play like war games on a computer and stuff. So that strategic element is appealing. And of course, everyone played Risk and stuff. Back in the day, like pre-TCGs, we'd play board games like that, strategic board games, right? So I think that's a good point. It really resonates with like a diverse group of players. I was wondering how, like in your Magic group and your peers, are people that are like really passionate about Magic as their primary game, are they resonating with Sorcery kind of like you are, or is it
There's
hit or
a
miss?
lot of crossover that I'm finding between people that are old school Magic people and Sorcery.
Hmm.
And there's probably a lot of reasons for that. Like you could probably do an entire video on that crossover. But I feel like people that just ultimately just like the old feel of the game, and they want to have a game that you can buy the cards and actually have some value. And also, like many of these people also might feel like they got burned by Magic, because like there's still a lot of misunderstanding out there. Like Magic 30th, people think is like, oh well, this is a shot. The reserve list is going to get printed. It's totally not going to get printed. But a lot of people have lost their faith and they think it is. And so they're like, well, Wizards are going to eventually print the reserve list. I'm going to sell all these old school cards. And what else is out there? And like, so Flesh and Blood took a huge nosedive. So now they're looking at Sorcery. And Sorcery actually has so much that's similar to Magic, or so much like theology that came from it, that it's like, it's a pretty natural transition. And like Flesh and Blood, for instance, Flesh and Blood is a very different game. Like Magic, you start out like with nothing and you build up as you go. Flesh and Blood is it's like a fighting game, and like you basically start out at full power, like you would in like a boxing match or like a ultimate fighting or something. And as you go on in the game and your deck thins out, your punches get worse, your kicks get worse, whatever. Like you start to get like less ability because your deck is thinning out and stuff's all getting tossed to the side. So it's like and all your armor is getting broken. So you start to begin at your toughest, and then you get weaker, and it's like, okay, am I going to go for the throat and like try to beat him, or am I going to try to just outlast him? That's kind of the dynamic for Flesh and Blood, which is not bad. It's just, it's different.
Yeah, it's like reverse.
And Sorcery is more like Magic, where you start with like all you got is like your deck and your Atlas pile and your Sorcerer, and now you're going to start building out. So it really aligns a lot more with Magic. And there's something else that I think really needs to be said. And like, I don't want this to come across as a huge negative for Flesh and Blood. I'm going to say it as someplace I hope that they go, that they explore. One of the greatest things about Magic is that you have like all these colors, and you can start intermixing the colors to make all these crazy deck combinations that people have never thought about. And so that makes the complexity of the game just go sky high. And I realize that also means the R&D gets a lot harder and such, but that's a great thing. You know, the fact that you can do like of the 5 colors, just do all these weird intermixings of it, right? Whereas with Flesh and Blood, like you don't really have that. Like if you pick like a Brute deck or something like that, then you're going to pick like either generic cards or Brute cards. Like you're not going to grab like Mechanologist cards and throw them into the Brute deck or something like that. So that they created these different archetypes, these different kind of like styles, but then they didn't yet make it so you can really easily like intermix them. And I feel like that's a missed opportunity, and I'm really hoping they're going to start going that way. Because when you start building a Flesh and Blood deck, you're like, okay, I'm picking a Mechanologist hero, and I have, oh, gee, I only have like 30 different Mechanologist cards. Well, I guess that's it. And it's like, you know, I feel like you solve it, you know, really, really quickly. Where Magic is like way more diverse than that, because you can intermix colors. And Sorcery has that. And they, in fact, encourage that, you know, by putting, you know, the dual lands out there. And they also put the mixes out there that you can effectively use for like surprise mana when people aren't expecting it. So they leaned right into like the intermixing of like the different, for them, elements, you know, instead of colors. But I think that's a really good thing. And I'm really glad that he did that. Like, for example, like in old school Magic, you know, this is a format, like, you know, everybody acts like they reinvented it or something. It's just original Magic with slightly different modernized rules, right? It's really all it is. And slightly different ban list. But anyways, it's kind of incredible that you can have people sitting down and brewing up a deck and coming up with something that at least in their local circle, people have never seen before. Every once in a while, you see a deck come along that people are like, oh, gee, I never thought about doing that combo with like Tabernacle of Pendrell Vale and Living Lands and stuff like that. Like I never thought about doing that in the past. Like this is like 30 years, right? And people are still coming up with these builds that no one's ever thought of before. That's incredible. And like as like I'm not a game designer, but like I am a person who designs things. So as like a designer, like I respect that like massively. And I think that speaks volumes for the ability of the game and the design. And Sorcery has that like really well. I think if this game hopefully just takes off and runs, I could see it being something where just like Magic, people buy like all these original sets and early cards and they just play for decades, you know, using the cards that they got.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. You touched earlier on Eric and Chris Wilson's background. So I
Yeah.
think when Pat and I was never I played Diablo 2 in college. That was a big thing, and then
Oh yeah.
afterward, Diablo 3 came out. I never got into Path of Exile specifically, but when Sorcery
Diablo
came out,
3
I
drove me
started.
crazy when it first came out.
Yeah, it was cool for a while, and then I don't know, kind of petered out.
The
But
auction house was so terrible.
yeah, yeah. So like when I heard about sorcery, I started looking into Eric's background because I didn't know who he was, and started learning about Path of Exile and kind of like the upstart of that game. And he's talked about it. Eric has in interviews as well about how entrepreneurs typically take something that's already great and then they just innovate on that. They don't like
Yeah.
radically invent something entirely new.
Yeah.
So much like Path of Exile built on the existing Diablo and innovated and made that new and different. I feel like Sorcery is kind of drawing inspiration from Magic, but yet at the same time it's very different from Magic. So it has that fundamental aspects with dual lands and certain kind of card dynamics. Like
Yep.
Chaos Twister is like a Chaos Orb throwback in a way, right? There's like these
Yeah,
fun
there's
little
Fireball
things.
that's in it.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's like a good fundamental basis to grow from. And then I like your idea of expansibility long term that you'd come back.
Yeah.
Because the other thing I thought was like, wow, they're coming out with this Arthurian Legends set. And it's kind of like, so the thing with alpha is and beta, it's a massive set, right? Like 400 cards. There's no cohesive lore by design. They want it to be experiential and have like a lot of artistic, stylistic diversity and gameplay diversity.
Yeah.
But then you go to Arthurian Legends and it's kind of like, the antiquities set, right? It has like a thematic lore that's specific to Arthurian legends. So how will that play with beta? I think is going to be pretty interesting. It will build upon the beta, and can that persist into the future? Or because like the first card they spoiled, it was like Did you see the round table card?
No, I haven't yet.
Yeah, they spoiled it in a little video vignette, and I posted it on the community group. And there's like it had the effect is propagated by knights and maidens and like the royal family gathering around the table, right? So it seems like it's specific to Arthurian, but there's also queens and princes and things in beta, so you could see how that cohesiveness is
So the
starting to
flavor
build
is
out.
there, for
Yep.
sure.
Yeah.
You know what worries me, and I'm really hoping for, is something that I think nobody will know until they try it. And that is that one of the biggest things that I think is a failure for Wizards of the Coast in the newer sets, and it's a debate on whether or not they do this intentionally. I kind of feel like maybe they do, where the best games, in my opinion, are the games where you can have powerful moves and powerful cards and powerful pieces, whatever, but there's always got to be like a yin to the yang. There's always got to be like a response to any big thing that you can do. And if you go too over leveraged in one strategy and someone comes in with the answer to it, they're going to punish you. Like, I think that's something that needs to exist in the game design. And when you pull up a Magic card, like right on the back, when you got the 5 colors, you could see that in the early set of beta. Whatever 2 colors were across from like the main color, they had things that were good at fighting this color. And so that was built like right into the very essence of the game. And I'm hoping that Sorcery hits a balance, unlike what Magic did, and maybe some others as well, in Times, Flesh and Blood, where one strategy or one thing just becomes too good, too dominant, and everybody goes to buy like those cards because it's like you either play this deck and win, or like you have to be able to deal with this one deck. So this one thing like dominates the entire meta. What I'm really hoping we see, and I think the way, in my opinion, that you measure how good a game is in terms of like its design is an extremely diverse meta. Like if you go to a tournament and you're looking at like a top 8, and like one of 40, 50 different decks can make it into the top 8 and they can all have a shot at winning, that's a good game design. That's a good meta. And I'm cool with them like having really powerful cards, but I just hope in future sets they don't go down the route Wizards did, where they start restricting and banning all these cards. They just kind of make like like the fire to combat the ice kind of thing.
Yeah,
like,
create answers to it.
Yeah, so they can kind of like balance it out, and that takes a lot of effort. As a game
Yeah.
designer, like you really got to spend your time like play testing and thinking about the strategy of your game to really balance that out. Like that's not easy. And I know that Sorcery has kind of chosen a route of like, we're going to do slower expansions. We're not just going to pump you full of cards like Wizards does. They're going to slow it down. I'm hoping that means that they really take their time and they really play test each set and they adjust all the power levels. So what you're left with is like the effectiveness of like a really good chess set, where like you can go ahead and pick your strategy, but like they're going to pick their strategy too. And you can't just show up at a tournament being like, oh, I've got a deck with a 70% win rate. Like you can't do that.
Yeah.
Like you're going to have to think about the way the meta is going and such, right?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because the 1 year annual release, we should touch on that because I've heard pros and cons, and like that's a hotly debated topic. Some people absolutely love it. Some people say, retail network and even the company itself cannot like generate enough money on 1 year releases to stay viable long term. It's very polarizing. I've heard like both sides of the story, but starting with like from a game development perspective, you're right. That gives them a long runway to kind of develop that set, fully flush out. Play testing, they're using play testers from the community. They have like
it raises my expectations of them.
Yeah, it's kind of like a double-edged sword, right? Because you got to get it right. So some people, the naysayers, will be like, "That's huge risk because you better make sure that set's not broken. Otherwise, you're going to lose people for a full year and then they're gone, right?" But on the other hand, they have like many months to develop. I really don't understand how Flesh and Blood started like as a fairly small LSS started as a fairly small team of people, but I think they developed that game for 5+ years, probably a group of people, but they are cranking sets out quarterly. Like, how could you possibly play test and flesh it out? Did you find that game had a lot of issues with broken cards and
the game does have issues with over dominance. I mean, if you get involved in the Flesh and Blood community, like you see that like certain decks become just super dominant. Like I've gone to pro tours where like if you were either playing Prism or you're playing Starlo or you're playing like it's just one of like a certain hero, and there's like maybe 3 different ones or one main dominant one, and like everything else is just really like not much chance. And so like it really kind of gets like honed down to like way too few. But they do this thing called Living Legends where one hero dominates too much for a while, then they rotate him out and he gets kind of retired. And I guess there's a coolness to that. But at the same time, it's like, well, wait a minute. But like, what if I just enjoyed playing that guy, right?
Yeah.
And now it's like out of the game. I mean, imagine if you're playing chess and your favorite piece is the queen, and you're like, well, queen's too dominant, so she's gone. And you're like, I enjoyed using that piece. Like, I would rather the game be better balanced and not like lose like all these critical pieces and get banned or removed or something like that. So I do actually think that Flesh and Blood would benefit from slowing down the releases and balancing out a bit more. And I would hope that you could see that at like the very top levels. So like if you went to like some big Flesh and Blood Pro Tour, and like the best case scenario is like literally like every hero has a chance at making like top 8. Like if that was there, then it'd be like, wow, you guys did it. That was perfect. Great game design. You nailed it, right? If you don't see that, then it's like the levels of worse than that is like the level of failure, in my opinion, as a game designer.
Yeah, I was laughing because like when I was playing Diablo 3, I was having fun with the Whirlwind Barbarian, and then they nerfed the hell out of that, and then I was like, oh man, what am I gonna do now? I'm out of here. I never played it again. But
the thing that drove me crazy on Diablo 3 when it came out is like I've always loved the sorcerer class, right? Yeah. And so I was playing sorcerer, and I was like, I'm not gonna go to the auction house. I'm gonna earn it all on my own. And like everything that dropped was just like gray and blue, and it was garbage, and it was levels below me. And like, so then I finally broke down and I went to the auction house, and I went from like struggling to like overpowered in like one visit to the auction house. So that was dumb. And the other thing that I hated about it is like, I was a caster. I'm a spellcaster. So I want to carry like a staff or something like that. Right. And so, but what they did is they based the damage of the sorcerer off of the weapon that's in your hand. And so I went on to the auction house and I bought this huge freaking barbarian 2-handed axe. And then I went back in the game, and now like I'm just like a cannon. I'm just like mowing through everything because my spells are doing like 3-4 times the damage than they were doing before. Right. And so I'm like walking around as a sorcerer carrying this axe just so my nukes hit harder. And I'm like, oh, this is dumb.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's funny, like you say, with the so far we've seen a lot of diversity of play. There's like been a lot of fan run tournaments kind of kicking off, and there has been like a pretty broad diversity of different avatars being played. There was one, and they did the March of the Mortals, like was it last weekend? And it's I think it was just this past weekend, and I think it was the Enchantress avatar that actually won that. But early on, like, you know, the Earth deck was super powerful. Everyone said the Fire avatar was garbage. No one was playing with it, and now Fire and Earth is a thing, you know. So it definitely evolves, and it's like there's been diversity so far, good sign, but it is like a little early. People certainly have not figured out the meta on a 400 card set that just released 3 months ago.
Like, you know, it could literally be the world's best balanced game, and I think it's so early that we just wouldn't know. Right. Because like how many years went by before people were like, you know, I got to tell you, Channel Fireball is not that good.
Yeah.
But everybody at the beginning is like, I got this deck that'll win by turn 2 or 3, and then you're like, whoa, and then you're like, you're never gonna win a tournament with that.
Yep. Yeah, so are you're still into old school Magic? Do you play that pretty regularly? And Sorcery is kind of like your side. What do you think about the length? So another complaint I hear is like Sorcery games can take fairly long, right? It's not like Magic where you could bang out a quick game, or Hearthstone or something, because the odd dynamic is I think it really resonates strongly with a middle-aged demographic like us, you know, that played as kids, and we got the nostalgia of the Magic, but a lot of us have kids in our lives, or like you know, a full-time job or 2 jobs and this and that. Like, it's hard to commit the time, right?
Well, so it's hard for me personally to judge that yet, because like I hit so many points where I'm like asking questions and trying to be like, wait, what the hell do I do in this situation? That I'll have to literally stop the game and grab my phone and pull it out and search on the internet to figure something out. Like, I keep hitting that right now. So like, I'm definitely not in a position to judge how quick a game is going to go when you got 2 people that like definitely know, you know, the ins and outs. And also, there isn't a lot of good resources for that right now. Like, I printed out their instruction booklet, but you know, there's not a lot of content and websites out there being like, oh no, this is what adjacent means, this is what nearby means. Like, just like, here you go, here's your answer.
Right.
So
yeah, I mean, there's videos and things, but you're right. You need like a website reference. You can just look it up really quick. And I think like if you go to Curiosa.io, I don't know if you discovered that page yet, but like they have little quick guides, and if you can look up a card and see some of the footnotes on how it plays. But you need like a quick reference manual that you can scan.
Too, you know, to like dig through and like learn all the rules.
Yep.
Which is not bad. That's not like a negative thing on the game.
Right.
You know, a good complicated game is just going to have a level of complexity to get in. So I don't consider that a negative at all. Yeah. I'm still crawling through it personally.
Yep. Yeah. So would you say you're more like on the far on the player spectrum, or also collecting and speculating a bit? You're not as into that, or a little bit of both?
Is like so there's a complicated answer there, because like straight up for me, like I am definitely in the player spectrum for sure.
Okay.
But I hit this thing a while ago, and this is what I was saying about like I studied finance, and like I really mean like I studied like finance, like the creation of money, central banking. I even got into cryptocurrencies and learned all about those, like up and down the stack, and I learned about the history of money, and you know, like constitutionally what it means. And so I went all through this like whole stack, and so I'm very interested in like finance and investment. And so although I'm buying cards and I'm actively involved in like playing the cards, I definitely like that gave you, you know, when you get knowledge, you start to get vision on like where things are going. And so I found myself in this spot for my old school channel where like I'm literally talking to some of the major like dealers that were involved with like buying and selling cards, the very people that are kind of pushing and creating those markets. Like I'm talking to them constantly. And I knew the game, and I knew the cards, and I knew finance. And so I was in this spot where I could actually like, have vision on where some of these things are going. So in my early days of my channel, Edwin the Magic Engineer, like I started like calling out cards. I was like, you guys, this card right here, this is undervalued. And I would give very valid, solid reasons. Like I'll give you a perfect example. Like looking at Collector's Edition, like if you know the fact that there's one of every card in Collector's Edition, but you also know the fact that like everybody loves Lightning Bolt and everybody wants multiple copies of Lightning Bolt. You generally play 4, right?
Yep.
And you also know that if you want a Bolt that looks like Alpha or Beta, Collector's Edition also looks like those, but there was only 9,000 CE and 5,000 ICE, you know, IE versions of Lightning Bolt that were made. And so you divide that by 4, and that's how many play sets of CE Lightning Bolts are out there. So when people went into the market and Alpha got sold out, Beta got sold out, Unlimited got sold out, And then now people are starting to, like, the revised bulk price is starting to go up. I'm looking at it like, you guys, like, why are you not buying CE, especially when CE became legal? Because I'm like, these look like alpha or beta. They look beautiful. And there's literally only 14,000 of these that exist, and everybody wants play sets. And everyone thinks we're a couple bucks. So I'll make a video like, that card's going to go up in price because that is seriously undervalued. What started to happen is people started following my channel. And even though, like, I'm not straight up like an investor, I'm not sitting on piles of these cards, but I had the ability through my contacts and my background to look at cards and see what was undervalued. So when I was calling it out, people were starting to actually go in and buying those individual cards. And that actually, like, I personally saw that as a negative, because my purpose, as I saw it, wasn't to go push the market of old school cards. I was talking to other players, and I was trying to tell the players, like, look, man, if you want to get there before all these investment guys, like, here's these cards. Like, dude, go buy them right now, because they are way too cheap right now. They're going to go up. That was my intention. But then the investment side, I think, started following what I was doing. And so I would point to a card and say that, and then it would just go. And like if it happened a couple times, I could maybe say, like, okay, well, this is not me. Like, I'm not the one causing this. But no, dude, I'm telling you, it happened like 40, 50 times where, like, I would call a card out, and then, like, the next day they would go sold out. And then within like a month, you'd see the price spike up because everyone's trying to buy it. And then there's none there because all the supply is gone. And so the correlation was, like, there. And so I had to admit to myself, like, okay, I'm causing a bad effect here. So I literally stopped making videos calling out the prices of certain cards that I thought was going to go up, because, like, I wasn't trying to manipulate a market. And, like, I got accused of that a lot, by the way.
Yeah,
People
I'm sure.
thought that I was, like, calling out a card, and they're like, oh, Edwin must be sitting on, like, a huge pile of antiquities, strip mines, or something like that. And, like, I literally wasn't. I had like 5 or 6 or something like that. But I called out. I was like, hey, dude, there's a ton of, like, revised, like, strip mines. Like people are going to want this card. There's not a lot of these cards. You're definitely going to want it. And everybody wants the antiquities because it's the black border original print. So go get those. And so they were like $10 at the time. And next thing you know, they shot up to like $100 and they all sold out. And people accused me like crazy of stockpiling them, which I didn't do. So I started, like, moving away from the prediction of cards, because that was never really, like, my purpose. And so I kind of had to redefine kind of what my channel was about for a while, because I was like, you know, like, some people think that's something about me that is really not me. That's really not what I'm going for. But, like, I have a lot of people coming to me looking for that kind of advice. And, you know, what's interesting is, like, it became clear at one point, if what I cared about was becoming, like, super popular and, like, grabbing onto, like, the attention I had and going viral per se, at one point it did become clear, like, what kind of videos you need to make, you know, the kind of clickbaity kind of videos that get the most, like, feedback.
Sure.
And, like, I literally intentionally chose not to go that way, because like I was telling you before, like, I'm an engineer. Like, that's what I do. Like, I have a career. I go write code every day. I do a ton of documentation, architecting how software is going to get built. And I'm happy with that. That's a nice, stable career, and it pays me pretty well. And, like, if you take off and you do this YouTube thing for a while, maybe it'll go well, but it's not stable. It's not dependable. And now, like, I don't want to walk away from a good career. So I intentionally just refocused on, like, making video content that I liked, that I wanted to do, which is, like, a lot of deck techs and talking about a lot of, like, really intricate pieces of, like, old school and markets and how finance interacts and such. And so the reason why I tell the story is because, like, I was very well aware that there's only tens of thousands of potential viewers out there that were interested in that content. But if you want to go big on YouTube, go make a video about Minecraft. You know, there's millions of kids out there that want to watch Minecraft videos. And if your goal is to, like, blow up as a channel, it's like, go do this and you will get subs, right?
Yep.
And so, like, it's interesting to me sometimes because I watch YouTubers kind of come up and I watch what kind of direction they go. Did they stick to what they liked and their passion and whatever? Or did they kind of, like, go for, like, the clickbait and kind of go off, like, that direction? And so I think the highest my channel ever hit is, like, almost 10,000 subs or something like that. And you know what? I'm cool with that. Because the people that came to my channel are kind of like my people that have a similar interest to me. And so, like, the quality of the comments and such and the feedback that I get was way better the only kind of really regret that I've got is I'm a family man, like I can't travel very much. So like I miss out on all the lobster cons. I missed out on like all the eternal weekends and such. It's, with a wife and a kid and a full-time job and, lots of dogs and such, like I just can't travel. So like I miss out on like a lot of really cool events, and like I hate that, but you got to take from it what you can, right?
It's tough. Yeah. No, I could totally relate to what you're just saying, because early on I was doing like a variety of stuff because I was into sorcery on many different levels. But if I did like a market video where I just like went on 130point.com and like, hey, look at the recent sales, look at everything spiking, those videos will just like blow up. Everybody watches those, right? But like I'm really into the artwork, right? And that's more of a niche, obviously, than like I'd rather go buy a painting before I buy the alpha foil stone, So I make a video like that, and like maybe 1,000 people or like a few hundred will watch it, and I'm like, this is the greatest video I've ever done. But it just like it resonates to a smaller group, but it's what I'm passionate about, so it's what I do. Whereas other creators, if you have like a utility channel, like if you make a how to play sorcery, that's an evergreen topic that's going to get viewed 1 million times, and like people get a ton of subs from that. But you got to follow what you love,
I feel like I'm still like trying to figure it out. But,
but
I had one video one time, like you've probably played the microprose version of like Magic, where you're the little guy walking around Chandelar and like you're trying to find all the cards and you have to battle like these various creatures or whatever. So that was a really cool game. I really liked that game. Well, I did this one video where I was like, basically, I think I was going through either a deck tech or I was playing the game against somebody, and I got like a whole bank of the sound files from Chandelar. Because there's a tap sound and there's a cast sound and there's like I literally edited the video and I put all of the Chandelar sounds like into the video.
That's awesome.
And so it sounded like I was literally playing Chandelar while I'm going through playing this game with real cards. And I was thinking, like, if people catch on to this, like, this is going to be huge. They're really going to like this. And it was a ton of work.
Yeah, I know.
Nobody cared.
That sounds fun, man. I'd check that out.
They're really annoying.
Yep. The video editing's a whole nother deal. Like I was doing recorded stuff early on. I was like, the lives are so much more fun. I'm just going to do live content. I don't care. Because it's not the way YouTube organizes it under that separate tab. Nobody finds those live videos to go back and watch, so it's kind of unfortunate.
Does.
Yeah. But
the deck tech videos are some of my favorites to do, but they always get the worst views, honestly. I get the most actual requests. People say, please do a deck tech. And if I'm getting typically like 1,000 to 10,000 views a video, somewhere in that range, depending on the topic, then I'll do a deck tech. And people be like, oh my God, a deck tech, I'm so excited. And I get 300 views.
Yeah, I know. And it's like the game player channels, like the people into gameplay, and they'll eat that stuff up. They'll watch you play a game all day, but the collector side will not watch that at all. But if you're a game player and you do a top 10 video, like the top 10 most meta relevant cards, all the collectors and speculators and stonkers are going to watch that because they want to know what the best cards are, right? Because they don't know how to play. So it's kind of a balance. It's kind of funny just how modern culture works and what people are into. So,
do you have a read yet? Because you're way more involved in sorcery than I am. Do you yet have a read on what the percentage is like of the people that are buying sorcery and involved in sorcery? How many of them are like literally playing it, hardcore players, versus people that are collecting it or maybe even like speculating on it, thinking like this might go up, so I'm just going to buy a few piles of it? Like, do you have any sense of what that is, that ratio?
That's very hard to quantify and measure. I'm like you. I have an engineering and business type, like finance background, so I'm very analytical too. So when I got back into TCGs, I was really interested and curious, like why was everything blowing up during the COVID Black Swan market? So I take like an analytical approach and try to figure out things like that. But it is difficult to measure. I mean, anecdotally, since I've made I focus more on the art, and I work with a lot of the artists to sell their paintings and artist proofs and things, and I'm like a art collector, so I understand that market more closely. That's the type of buyers I'm dealing with. But through my Facebook group and the Discord and all this stuff, I know a lot of the main like single sellers, so I get some like anecdotal insight from them, and what they're saying is the most played cards, like the beta cards, are selling like crazy, and they're buying the cheap cards because they're buying the ones they need to play, right? And the cheap ones aren't always necessarily the most valuable. They might be common ordinaries that are just relevant, but The other interesting aspect, and I want to ask you about, I'm going off on a tangent now, but I don't want to forget the point. Like when they printed Alpha, we knew there was 29,000 boxes, right? But they also told us what the pull rates were. So we were able to back into the math on how many Alpha unique foils there were, exceptional, elite, and ordinary, right? So we know the pop size of all those, and there's only 248 foil uniques in Alpha of each of the unique cards. So it's, even though 29,000 boxes were printed, there's like extreme rarity at the individual foil level. So, if every single box was opened and it became available on the market, you could have 248 complete sets in theory, right? But you figure some percentage is going to stay sealed. People just put it on the shelf and think it's going to go to $1 million. Some are lost. They just throw them out or they don't care. So like there's going to be some like very tiny sets of the Alpha that you could actually acquire. So that, I think that's why there's extreme valuation in the Alpha. And plus, like, people just love the project. It's resonating strongly. But I'm wondering, like, what your thoughts are on how Eric designed the collectability aspect and rarity, extreme rarity like that, and with the curio cards.
Honestly, I think, in my opinion, at the moment, he's got an A+ in my opinion. It comes down to what he does from here. And this is a point that I want to be extremely clear on. There's a lot of people out there that want to look at like a CCG or TCG, whichever you want to call it. They want to look at it and call these things game pieces, right? And that, it's not even like, I don't think that's even an opinion. I think that's just wrong, just straight up wrong. And here's why. If you want to look at it in the form of like, this is like a game piece, then that is a correct opinion for a game that you buy and all the game pieces come in the set. Like if you go buy a kit of Monopoly, or if you even go buy another card game like Dominion, you get all the cards in that set that you need in order to play that game. So in that, those are game pieces. And the thing is like, if you go buy like a starter kit of like Dominion, for instance, what do you pay, like 30, 40 bucks? And then you get like every card in it, and now you're just playing it, right? So the price per card is like much lower. In a TCG or a CCG, the company who prints it, there's two things they do. They want to sell the cards in randomized boosters, which is one thing. And secondly, they want to charge you at least $4 a pack for like 15 cards in those boosters, right? You can't do that for game piece type games. The very fact that the company makes them in randomized boosters and charges $4 per, right out of the get-go, literally says this is not a game where these are just game pieces. This is a TCG. Right. They are intentionally printing it and selling it in a way that forces the creation of a secondary market. And the secondary market is the thing that justifies the prices that they can charge for these packs, that $4 per pack. Because if every pack you open, every card is worth 2 cents, you're not going to go buy cards at $4 a pack anymore, right? And so if the company wants to sell them at $4 a pack, they have to recognize and support the secondary market. And the secondary market is going to be based on the rarity to some extent. So to come into the situation and say these are game pieces, it is not an opinion, it's wrong. They are not sold at game piece prices. They are not packaged at game piece prices. So like that is just hard my take, right? Inside of that theory, if you're going to look at it and say, okay, this is what they are. They're meant to be collectible. They're meant to be rare. They're meant to be game pieces. That's the deal that the producer makes when they sell them to me in randomized packs of 15 cards at $4 each. And then I buy them. That's the deal, right? They sell them as a TCG. I buy them as a TCG. So I agree with that deal. I accept those terms. I put my money into those terms. Now for that producer to go off and like print them into oblivion, I think that's a betrayal, because they created a TCG. They led you to believe it's a TCG. They wanted your money as if it's a TCG, and then they printed them into no value. So in my opinion, and this is definitely the way I see it, like I am cool with where Sorcery's at. I love it. I think he's done a great job. Now it's a case of do not overprint, right? Yep. And if it turns out to be the case that like a lot of people in the world start playing and these cards start to get really hard to find, then don't balance that out by just banning all these cards or printing them. Those are the bad ways to solve it. solve that problem by printing new cards that are like the yin to the yang. So there's new cards that come out that like they can help keep these older cards in check a little bit, not make the older cards worthless or not worth playing. You want them to still like be good game wise, right? But you also don't want newer people that didn't have a chance to buy those original cards to get shut out. So that's a fine line that you need to walk. It's not easy.
Yeah.
And that is exactly why I circle back to like, okay, if it's going to be a TCG and it's going to have valuable cards, right? And they want us to believe in these cards, I'm 100% okay with them doing a year-long release cycle as long as they balance that game out and they make sure that they're not going to get stuck in a place where as a game creator, they now need to overprint and destroy value, or they need to like just start banning cards. In my opinion, those are two easy shortcut ways out that come with secondary damage, right? If they overprint the cards and the people who believed and invested take a loss. If they start banning cards, then like the people like, I mean, if they ban your card, not only does it go down in value, but hey, maybe I liked Library of Alexandria. Maybe I wanted to play that in a deck. Maybe I really enjoyed it. Now I can't, right? Because you just knocked it off the table. So I'm really hoping where Eric chooses to go from here is along that balancing route. But I'm completely happy with where he is at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's well articulated because, I mean, fundamentally, like as a business, you need to, it is a business, right? Like he created a business and a game, and he's trying to have broad market appeal and appeal to all market segments. And I think Alpha did that beautifully with the extreme rarity that appeals to collectors. Like if you want the foils, they're going to be expensive, but it's not shutting out like the player. There's a player purist segment that wants everything to be dirt cheap, and you can get all these non-foils from beta plenty cheap, you know, like it's especially with the target demographic of this game is probably like, I don't know, on average probably 30 to 50 in that range, right? I mean, most people that are establishing their careers and they have the means to, anyone could go buy any deck they want in non-foil. Most of the market, like a high percentage of the market could, I would bet.
Yeah.
But
there's
you also have
cards that are high dollar non-foil.
Yeah. But you also have the collectible nature with the extreme rarity of the foils, and then also the curios are kind of like its own thing. What do you think about the idea? So the concept of curios, as they first rolled it out, was they're not saying what the curios are, for one, right? And that was intentionally by design, right, to kind of re-invoke the early 90s dynamic where you couldn't just go on the internet and find that card list. You had to open the packs, and we all, like people that were in the Facebook community group and the Discords and things, that's exactly how it played out. We discovered them in the pack, people would post it online, and then, you know, quickly spread from there. But they're so rare that like we would see a few of them, and then that lasted for probably a few months where you know, it took like a few months until we discovered all 18 of them is what it ended up being in alpha and beta. And maybe there's more, we don't know. Who knows?
That was a beautiful move on his part because it doesn't affect the gameplay at all.
Right.
And it really affects the collectability, and it causes a ton of excitement, and it creates a lot of free press also. For the price of just doing slightly different artwork and a little bit different print sheet, you know, now he just sent ripples through the community, right? So perfect. I love it. That's great.
Yep.
But I want to really mention this too, because before we move away from like the print thing, I really think that Flesh and Blood almost did it perfect at the beginning. Like the idea that James White had to basically have like a printing of like first edition and have a printing of Unlimited, and they're the same sets, but the first edition sets were like very low print, very small. Because like you cannot complain about game pieces when you have the Unlimited. It's like people can just go get Unlimited. But now you have this special box of first edition that you can go buy. And now it's like you've given a sandbox for all the collectors and investors to go play in, so they don't ruin it for the game players. So honestly, I think that was a genius idea. But there's a couple things he did wrong. In my opinion, he shouldn't have like done the first release with the first edition. He should have done the first release with Unlimited for like draft events and stuff, so the price, you know, stays down and stuff like that. And he should have had the first edition that you could like win as prizes. Like you win the event, you get a box of first edition, or you can buy them from your LGS, BDT LGS only gets a couple. So like let them be like rare and like let them remain very rare. So he should have released the Unlimited first, and then the first edition is one change I think he should have done, and then the second one is he never should have raised the print of the first edition. So he started increasing the print on first edition. So for like Welcome to Wrath, it was like 16,000 display boxes or something. And then it was like, you know, like, I don't know, 30% for Arcane Rising. And then Crucible Worlds, they like doubled it. And then all of a sudden Monarch came out and it was like 10x. It was way up on the number of like first editions. And they just saturated their market. And it completely ruined like what was good about first edition. And I lament that so much because like when that game first came out, like I've struggled for years in Magic about this whole like collectors versus players thing and like the whole proxy debate. That's been a big thing in my life, right? Because I want the games to go, but I also like the fact that cards are valuable and stuff like that. So it's like, how do we solve it? And I really felt like Flesh and Blood solved it at the beginning. And then they just went away from it because everybody was complaining about not getting first edition. And I so hate that like he went away from that. And so like I feel like Eric, to some extent with Sorcery, has kind of captured lightning in a bottle. Like he's got something great. Now it's like, don't screw it up.
Yeah, and it's a fine line. I mean, I actually followed Flesh and Blood closely because as I was getting back into TCGs, that was like the new big game that was coming up. That was initially that was the game that was like almost felt like a Magic throwback because James White had the Magic pedigree and he had a lot of experience in the industry. And you're like, here's a great, businesses that have a great creator and CEO usually do well because they understand the industry, they understand the market. He had all the supply chain experience. Right. So like when it's that leap from, what was it, Crucible, right, to Monarch. Like, I don't know. I struggle to wrap my mind around like how a smart business person could make a conscious decision to ramp to that extreme unless there was just like an honest, and maybe this is still a fault on him, but an honest like misjudgment of how large his market was. Maybe he thought the growth was so extreme that was appropriate print run size. And you kind of get duped by the distributors that are pounding the table and saying, give me more, more, more. We're selling as fast as we can. The retail network is saying the same. So that's kind of the trap you fall into. It's really, there's no good, well, actually, it brings me to this point on the Dust program, right? I think like Eric and the team had this idea that you can redeem the Dust code from the box to get a gauge on where product is going, how it's being distributed. Is it all bottlenecked with breakers and single sellers, or is it like widespread? Because if it's widespread and it's being regionally purchased and opened all over the place and people are logging in and they're like, they have an account based on their zip code. If it's widespread, that actually is a good gauge to say there is genuine player interest here and it's spread wide and far to some extent. I mean, there could be speculators and collectors to some extent too, but at least that is like a quantifiable feedback mechanism that I'm not sure Flesh and Blood does that, right?
Well, there's some interesting things Flesh and Blood has done that I've paid a close attention to. I'll give you like one that I really key in on. There are certain places where the print run size of a certain set is known, right?
Right.
Like, you can look back now and like, I got to give LSS credit for that. They're actually disclosing an awful lot of information. Same with the print run sizes. Like a lot of other places that like have never done that. And they probably will never do that, but Flesh and Blood did. Anyways, a one that I like to call out is Everfest First Edition. That's a really important one to pay attention to with the math. And the reason is this is one case where there is only first edition. There is no unlimited, right? So the first edition is the only thing you've got. And we now know the print size of the Everfest First Edition. Okay, so if you know the print size of the Everfest First Edition, and you can look at it and say, okay, well, if people are players and they really want to get their cards, it's reasonable to say that every person who considers themselves a heavy player is probably going to buy like 4 booster boxes, right? Because then you're going to get most of the commons and the rares, and I'm trying to translate here like the between the games, like all like the mythics and like the legendaries. You start to have to like just purchase the legendaries, and of course like the one fabled, whatever. But anyways, like so with 4 booster boxes, you get a pretty good base of like the commons and the rares at the very least, and then you have to like start purchasing as you go up. But the point is like those 4 boxes is reasonable, right?
Yep.
So I think if you want to have a sense of how big is the player base, Go to a set that doesn't have huge secondary market collector investment value. That's Everfest. You know, you can buy those boxes at like $50 a pop. At least you could for a while. I haven't looked recently. But you know the print run size, and it's reasonable to say how many boxes every like very active player buys. So now you can look at it and say, okay, if they had, I don't remember what the numbers off the top of my head, maybe 220,000 boxes or something that they printed, display boxes. There's some number. You look at that, divide it by 4, and you can say, if we had this many really active players in the world, what would I expect to happen? I would expect that all the Everfest boxes would sell out, and it would be people like clamoring to the secondary market to eat up all the rest of that supply because they really want to get the cards so they can actually go play. But what you actually have in Everfest is you have these boxes just sitting out there at like $50 a box. It's only the first editions. They're not selling very well. The supply is just right there on the side. I look at that and say, you know what? That was a data point that told me how many flesh and blood players there are in the world. Yeah. Because it's not the collectors buying it. It's not the investors buying it. It's the players that would want it. I know the print run size. I know about how many boxes they would want. And the fact that I see all this supply sitting there gives me some squishy idea on how many players are out there. And I've done that kind of thing, this like mental math, like paper napkin math, whatever you want to call it. I've done that in various other ways within Flesh and Blood. And I keep landing on about the same numbers, right? I keep landing on between 20 and like 50,000 players, like very active players is how many I keep landing on for Flesh and Blood. So I feel like I have like some kind of sense of how many players are out there. And like if you go to an event, you'll have a lot of Flesh and Blood players that are there, but I'm guessing like a lot of them are the same people, but they're really invested in it. So like they'll travel more often or something like that. Anyways, like that's kind of like a long way around to tell a story, but it explains, I think, what you can do when you start to know the size of a print run and you see what supply and demand is doing on a market, and you know which cards people are going for that are like, oh, the collectors want this, but the players want this. So how many of these are selling compared to the print? Yeah. And that can start to give you really important data. And let me tie that back to old school for just a second. We know the print run size on a lot of these old sets, like the Alpha, Beta, Arabian Nights, Antiquities, Legends. We know the print run size. So we know how many Juzam Djinns are out there, how many Manadrains are out there, how many, like we know that total print run size, right? And so if you look on the secondary market and you see a card going for a certain price, now you can weigh that against how good of a card it is in the game. Does everybody want to play a set of 4 of these, or at least a single one? You can start to get a sense of how many like old school players are out there. And then I can also look at like my channel. Like I think I have like almost 9,000 subs at the moment on my channel. And people that come to my channel generally are people that mostly like to play old school, but then they also have some interest in finance, right? And I've heard some people out there being like, oh, there's only like 2,000 old school players in the world. And I'm like, bull crap. Because I've got almost 9,000 people that routinely come to my channel, right? And almost all that I talk about is old school. And if I go to old school events and I talk to people and like, you know, like I'm not that famous. I mean, like a good amount of people there are like, oh yeah, who are you? Like they've never met me. They don't know me. They're not familiar with me. And so out of like an event with like 300 people, I'd say maybe half of them don't even know who I am. So how can there be a case where there's like 9,000 people subscribed to me that love old school and everything, and I go to a big event with super active people and only half of them there know me? So like I start to land on numbers for old school that like I think there's somewhere around like 25,000 to 40,000 really active old school players. No, sorry, I should say active, not super active. Like the super active are the ones that travel to events. Yeah. But I mean people that have the cards, they play with their friends, they meet up every once in a while, they at least have their collection, they maybe watch a few YouTube videos here and there. But then when you take that, like 20,000 to 40,000 people that are decently actively doing it, and you contrast that against like, okay, there was like 12,000 Juzam Djinns that were printed. Now you start to get a sense of why that card is valuable. Because it's like, there's not a lot of cards that were printed, but they're being consumed by a group of people that is also like not a lot of people, but it's a lot more than that, right?
Right.
And so that's why I got all excited when Magic 30th came out, because I was like, oh, Magic 30th is out. They're going to print proxies of these new cards. And so I recognized like this is just a numbers thing. if there's like 40 million Magic players around the world, if even 1% of those people bought some Magic 30th, got involved and interested and passionate about these old cards and these old formats and played it, and then they eventually started buying old cards, even 1% of the world's Magic players, well, God, you're talking 400,000 people. This is against like a backdrop of like a format that has 20 to 40,000 people, another 400,000 coming in because of Magic 30th. It would have sent card values through the roof. It would have been insane. But that would have been good because now like they're getting these cheaper, newer cards they can play with. So I was like, well, God, the players win here. The collectors and the investors, they win. My favorite formats are going to grow. I was all excited about that. And then I saw the price of Magic 30th and I'm like, freaking A, Wizards. $1,000 for 4 packs? Are you freaking kidding me?
That's an interesting perspective. And
it was like the opportunity was just gone, right?
Right.
Because now all those players that wanted cheap cards so they could get into these old formats, like, well, they weren't going to get it.
Yeah.
And then this very narrow group of like weird collector people and investor people ran in and bought like those very few boxes. And now they do trade for good value, but it's like, dude, there's almost none of those Magic 30th out there, and they're all trading and selling to each other. Right. So
I mean, I never thought of it like that. You're right. They missed an opportunity to reduce the barrier to entry to that format. Because like when I came back to Magic after not playing since I was a kid, I was like, the barrier to entry was massive. I was like, oh my God, they have this reserve list. Like all these cards are banned. They're worth a fortune. Like, why would I even bother? And then Modern was being pumped out every 3 months, like it always was, if not more. So I was like, I'm not just going to piss away like tons of money on like Modern doesn't have any value, I would guess. I don't follow that market closely on Modern Magic, but I don't want to be part of a game that has no value because value makes things worth collectible. It's fun to collect and to play and own. One of the greatest things about
like these TCGs is that cards can retain value.
Yeah, so that market's like all hosed up. And so you asked and someone asked in the chat here, like, how do you determine, do you have any gauge on like players versus collectors? And again, it's hard to measure, like I just observe
they're asking me that or you that?
Well, you kind of asked me like if I had a sense for that, and someone in chat asked us both, or maybe it was directed to you. I don't know. But like the thing is, it's hard to measure except anecdotally, since I have like these platforms that have like tons of passionate sorcery people, like pushing 4,000 in the group and another 1,000 or so in the Discord. Like you kind of get a feel for what people's interests are and which are players, which versus speculators, and also. Since I was like following Flesh and Blood a little bit like a few years back, I see like the Flesh and Blood names and the personalities like coming into sorcery. And there was a lot of that early on. I think like a lot of them speculated on Alpha because they saw what happened to Flesh and Blood Alpha, right? And figured history will repeat itself and this will blow up. And lucky them, it did. So a lot of them did okay, but a lot of them sold out now. And then like I don't see... Like I could kind of see who's buying artist proofs from me, who's buying singles when I auction them. I see in the group like who's more engaged and actively participating. And it's interesting because there are like a bunch of those people from early on, and that those are either collectors here to stay and or players here to stay. A lot of them are both, right? And then but there's also rotation, which is great because you see new people commenting, see new people coming into the game. That's a sign of growth. It's not measurable, but it's an indicator that the growth is there, even though beta product has been out and it's been available through Team Covenant for going on 4 months now, and it's still being bought up. I think it's a really good thing
that beta right now is the same cards as alpha, and like there's there's going to be a decently limited print. That's what I keep hearing through the grapevine, anyways. And the cards, the same cards, but they're reasonably priced right now. Like what are the boxes? $180 each or something like that. It's not too bad.
150 through Covenant. Yep.
So another point that I always hear from people is they always like when they don't know about the whole proxies and that whole thing, they always ask the question, well, why would anybody buy a real card when they can just proxy a card? And because like in their mind, on the first sense, that sounds logical. That sounds like, oh yeah, well, why would, like, if I could just do this for free, why would I ever do anything else?
Yeah.
And if you want to look at it in that perspective, then you fail to explain, you fail to understand why a serialized card costs so much, or why does an Alpha Shivan Dragon cost so much? Or why does everybody, like they start with like these magic cards and then they eventually upgrade to the bling cards, right? Look at my foil commander. Look at this like rare version of it.
Yep.
If you don't understand the proxy argument, then you can't explain why everybody already naturally does these upgrades. It's because when people love a game and they're passionate about the game, they want the thing that they care about to be the latest, coolest, rarest like version of it. And like, it doesn't feel good to be the person playing with proxies, especially if you're sitting side by side against all these guys, slapping out like alpha and beta cards and stuff like that. Like, you don't want to have a proxy. You feel cheap when you got it. And so like the more you get into it and the more you play, the more that desire increases to have real cards.
Yeah.
And so like I keep telling people, like, I have watched this for 30 years. I have literally watched people begin playing a game and they complain about the price. And then the more passionate they get into it, next thing you know, they start upgrading their decks. They start buying the bigger cards. I know so many people that started playing like old school and vintage and legacy, and their entrance was through proxies. And so I eventually kind of had to just look at it and realize, like, well, okay, you can make that argument that some people might proxy and never buy a single card, but you know what? That hasn't been my experience. My experience is if they try it and they love it, they're going to start buying real cards. So yeah, like Magic 30th for me was nothing more than a massively missed opportunity to introduce all these younger players to like vintage, legacy, old school, like all these expensive modern variants and Commander and such. Like they missed their chance completely to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting about proxies. I think Eric really gets collectability as an old school Magic player, and a guy like yourself that's been around the game since close to the beginning. Maybe the beginning for him. I know he has an insane alpha collection, but the thing is, like, they had the print and play cards were readily available. You could literally print the cards yourself in Discord for like a year and a half before alpha even came out. So I was like, ooh, that's interesting. People are just going to print the cards. They're not going to buy it. That seems risky, right? But it misses the point. Like, people want the real deal. And then like he introduced these like beautiful variants. What do you think about, are you into the art at all? What do you think about full art one side, or foil one side, full art back? I love that.
I am the full art on one side and the normal card on the other side. Like, for me personally, it's that aspect isn't big. Because like I always double sleeve my cards, and I always put them with like, some opaque, backing on it, usually like the glossy back for Dragon Shields. So like as soon as I put it in a sleeve, I never see it again. So it's only the front of the card that I generally see. So the backside thing doesn't really do it for me. But I actually
it's a
really
collector
like artwork, and I don't as much appreciate the digital artwork. I actually like the more normal hand painted artwork, and even more to the point, I actually enjoy the more simple art, right? The kind of stuff like when you see like original Magic cards like the alpha and the beta, I don't know how many original arts you've seen of those in person, but most of them are pretty small,
right?
Because like I guess what's his name, Jesper Myfors, he was one of the art, I think he was like the art director, and he actually told the artist back then, like, your art's going to be on a tiny little card, so do something that will translate to small print like very well, right? And they didn't have great print quality then.
And so you know what? The scanner
artwork that would work in like a really small window. But now, like, when I look at a Magic card these days, like, you can see this crazy good artwork, that is like very skillfully done. But then when you put it in this tiny card, like, that detail is really intense.
Yeah.
And I just don't really get to appreciate it, Like, I felt like Eric captured this with sorcery. Like, when I play like, one of the gems on the table, or I play the Philosopher's Stone or something like that, it's like, even from like arm's length distance, I'm like, okay, that's a Philosopher's Stone. It's just a big stone. It's a big cool looking stone in the middle of like this card. And so I get to like enjoy that artwork. So personally, I like that. Like that's what I get more enjoyment out of. Like cards that I can clearly see the artwork at arm's length, and they kind of match the theme and everything of the game. I enjoy that more personally.
Yeah, well, I think
everyone's own perspective, right?
No, I think you touched on a great point where, once again, he appealed perfectly to like more of a player like yourself, because you see, I mean, TCGs, and I actually heard the current one. I don't know if they have multiple, but I saw an interview that another guy did at one of these Magic shows with one of the art directors, and he talked about the same thing. He's like, when you look at the card, there needs to be like one very recognizable focal point on that card that tells you exactly like what the point of that card is, what it does. So Eric did that, but then the interesting thing is, like, a lot of these artists for sorcery, they're not magic artists. Like some are, but a lot are not. And they've never done any TCG before. So some were just like painting in their own native style and they're doing these big elaborate paintings, tons of detail. But yet like Eric still was able to zoom in on like the focal element. And then the cool thing to appeal to the art enthusiasts is that when you see that full art back, that's really special. You start to discover things you didn't see under the text box and you get more of the full perspective and the detail and the landscape and all that kind of stuff.
I really think he did a good job with that. Like, I'm really appreciating it. And
that's cool to hear.
It's funny, like there was misses also with like some of the early Magic cards. Like when I look at Stasis, the artwork for Stasis, it's been 30 years. I still look at the thing and I'm like, I don't know what the hell I'm looking at here. But okay, that's Stasis. I recognize it from across the table, but I don't know what the hell that is.
Yeah. I went back and like researched because like I really got into the art aspect of things, and I went back and learned a lot about Magic early days. Part of it was, as you say, it's like form factor for a small card, so that was just the way to do it. The scanner technology was limited back then, so they couldn't take like a large painting and scale it down without losing all the resolution. So you had to paint like that. The timelines were much tighter. That's a great thing in sorcery, longer timelines. And I know he's commissioning paintings like for multiple sets out, you know, so that like time and detail that goes into that is not different. And then also the artists own the copyright. So they have an invested interest to make that art as good as possible because they can monetize it with prints and t-shirt. Melissa Benson does t-shirts and stuff, you know, like there's multiple ways they can monetize it if it's a strong piece of art that's going to resonate with people beyond just the game context. It's great
because like you know, if he creates a good business and a good game and like a whole community of like good product, and he can just bring these artists along with him and they can benefit from its growth and its expansion as well, then that's just awesome, you know.
All right, man. Well, we could wrap it up soon. I probably kept you longer than maybe intended. I figured we'd go an hour or so. So I appreciate you hanging in there. It was great to connect. I really appreciate you coming on. You seem like a great guy. I'm like a big fan of your channel, and I always, you know what, I joked with.
I was a bit late at the beginning. I was rushing home from work. There's a lot of traffic in Orlando now.
Yeah, I kind of joke that like you and Dan remind me of like the classic like mid-90s guys I knew like playing Magic as a kid. Especially Dan. Like I joked that he was cryogenically frozen in 1995 and they just thawed him out like 2 years ago because he's like the quintessential Magic guy.
When you see Dan on camera, that's Dan off camera. Like,
both of you are like super genuine. You just are who you are on camera or off. That's super cool. I love that. Just be yourself and, you know, love what you love and stick to your passions. That's what it's all about, right?
The channel was never about get rich or famous or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, I am literally sitting here doing exactly what I love and I'm sharing it with the world, and that was the point. And I literally saw the times where I could be like, if I do more of this, maybe I'll go viral. And I was like, no, thank you.
Right. Yeah, because you want to connect with people who connect on the same level as you. So
totally.
Yeah, man. So maybe we'll try again like in a few months as things evolve and reconnect again. But I'm sure we'll be talking. It was cool to see you pop up in the Facebook group. That's how I thought to reach out to you. So I'm glad to see you getting involved and getting interested. Spread the word to your buddies in old school Magic. I'd love to see more get in.
Edwin will come, right?
Yeah, right. All right, man. Have a great night. Thanks again for coming on.
Time. I hope you guys have a great day.
Yep. Bye. Take care, buddy. See ya.